Well, PECOTA projections are out for the 2025 season. We do this episode every single year when they do come out. Let's talk about it all today on Locked On Tigers.
You are Locked On Tigers, your daily Detroit Tigers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Tigers. I'm, of course, your host, Scott Bentley. Today is Monday, February 10th, 2025. Thank you so much for making Locked On Tigers your first listen. Every single day, we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Happy Super Bowl Monday, everybody. Still think it should be a holiday. You know, like we're all staying up and watching it. Maybe even like a half day, like, oh, we're just going to show up for work for the afternoon. But I appreciate you all for tuning in on this, Super Bowl hangover Monday. Hopefully it's a good game. I'm recording this obviously before the game, or else I'd be recording, at 1 a.m. Monday morning. So hopefully it's good. Go Eagles a little bit in here. But we'll see. I don't really have too much of a dog in the fight. Today is our PECOTA projections episode. This is one of my favorite episodes to do every single year. And it's an episode that I have done every year, I believe, since taking over as host of this show. So this is our whatever, how many years that is now, 4 or 5, whatever. I don't even know. But PECOTA, for those who don't know, is from Baseball Prospectus, and it is a big, formula projection system that Baseball Prospectus runs and puts together every single year. And they basically run like a billion simulations. It's not actually a billion. It's either I think it's 1,000, but it might be like a million or something. It's a lot of simulations of the whole season. And they get the average amount of wins and losses for every single team across all of those simulations. And that is your quote unquote projection. Now, it is a bell curve. So you can look at each team's bell curve of, where the point of data is for win total across every single simulation. And they all look the same. They're all, like I said, a bell shape, because you have the outliers where it's like, okay, in one simulation, the Tigers won 40 games. And that was like everything went wrong and everything was terrible. And then you have one simulation where the Tigers won 105 games. And that was like everything went right and it was so incredible. And obviously, again, their actual projection, that Baseball Prospectus, goodness, I can't say that word, Baseball Prospectus puts out there, is always the average, or the total that gets the most in, right? The what is that? The median, the mean, whatever. I wasn't a very good student, but the Tigers and the AL Central I find very interesting, and Baseball Prospectus added a new feature last season that is now here for the preseason of this year, and I think it's awesome. It's depth chart playing time projections. So it's literally, if you assume health of everybody on the roster, what percentage of games they are going to get at every position. So we're going to talk about that from the Tigers' perspective as well. I had a comment last year when I did this episode from someone. I wish for the life of me I could remember who, but I can't remember. It was someone who I'm like familiar with and is a semi-frequent commenter. Put it out last season that the episode of just like going through and saying the win totals and saying, oh, like that's interesting or whatever, it doesn't give the context to the listener of like how often are these accurate, or like what is the on a consistent basis, are these good? So we're actually going to start off by looking at the American League Central from 2024, and we can kind of compare what actually happened to what happened in, or what the Baseball Prospectus projections were. So the Twins were projected in preseason of 2024 to win 88 games, the Guardians 83, your Tigers 75, the Royals 70, and the White Sox 66. Now, obviously, The two immediate ones that jump out the page at you are the Guardians won way more than 83, and the White Sox lost way more. They won way fewer than 66, despite being projected to be the last place team and the worst team in the AL Central. That they 20 plus win difference from even their projection, because it was a historically bad season, obviously, for the Chicago White Sox. But it's interesting. So the Twins win less, they win fewer rather than 88 games. The Guardians, Tigers, and Royals all go over in 2024. So I find that interesting, and I think it's important to add kind of what we saw last season to the context of carrying over to 2025, because now we know, not entirely, because there's still a lot of free agents out there, but we know what teams have added, we know what they've addressed, we know what they've maybe lost, etc. when talking about the difference between last year and this year. So PECOTA likes the Twins again, and that kind of bit it in the butt last year, right? Obviously, 88 wins projected to win the American League Central in 2024. The Twins get fourth and miss the postseason, but still were within a couple of games of that wild card and still had a fine season, just not a pushing 90 wins playoff team. But the fascinating thing to me is there is not a single team that's projected to have more than 87 wins in the American League Central. The Twins are projected to get first with 86.6 wins, so we can round that up to an 87 win season that puts them at 75 losses, and PECOTA has that as good enough for winning your American League Central. I don't love the Twins again this year, and like that is something I was right about last year. I was wrong about plenty in the American League Central a year ago as well. So grain of salt for my own opinion too, I guess. But like I faded the Twins last year, and they might have even done better than I thought. Like I had them kind of pegged as like a high 70s win total. I feel like maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm misremembering, but I was really big on Cleveland last year, as I tend to be, and was kind of a little bit more sour on Minnesota. I kind of hold that sentiment still. I mean, 87 wins. I think if they stay fully healthy, it's absolutely possible. And I also think that their pitching is very volatile. Like you have some pitchers in the Twins rotation that I think very highly, if Joe Ryan puts it all together and has a, fully healthy season, he could be one of the better pitchers in the American League. Like they have, and obviously they have one of the best relievers in all of baseball on their back end too. They had some other really key kind of bullpen pieces down the stretch as well. I don't hate Minnesota. I just, when I look at the American League Central, I do not predict that they will be the best team in the American League Central in 2025. But that is where PECOTA stands. In second, you have the Kansas City Royals at 81 and 81. It's technically 81.1 and 80.9, so a tenth of a win away from exactly perfectly mid of being the exact 81.0, 81.0. But essentially, the projection here is that Kansas City will finish with an exactly 500 record. The projection win total for Kansas City does not surprise me. Okay, I have them around that win total as well. High 70s, low 80s win total is kind of in it, but probably won't be big buyers, probably won't be big sellers either. But the thing that jumps out at me is that 81 and 81 record is second in the American League Central for a team that brought 3 teams to the postseason in 2024. In 2025, PECOTA has only 2 teams even 500 or better, and only 1 team actually over a 500 record, and has everyone else, the other 4 teams, at 500 or worse, including Cleveland, who was like within a couple of wins of having the best record in the American League. They have Cleveland being sub 500 this year. We'll talk about Cleveland, and we'll obviously spend a lot of time talking about your Detroit Tigers. And no surprise to anyone, Chicago in 5th. We'll talk about all of those teams and the Tigers depth chart right after this. Got to talk to y'all today about our friends over at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on that action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets through the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on the fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Segment 2, Locked On Tigers. Appreciate y'all for tuning in. As always, making us your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We will, of course, be back tomorrow. You heard me right, everybody. We are officially back on 5 episodes a week. This is the week that pitchers and catchers report for the Tigers. We will obviously celebrate that later in the week when it happens. And the Locked On Network views Major League Baseball as an in-season sport starting this week. So we will be bringing you 5 episodes a week from now until December of 2025. We are so back. It's in the air. Baseball's in the air. You can almost smell it. I drove through, a foot of snow last night, but dang it, baseball is almost back. And can't wait for all the storylines that come out of pitchers and catchers reporting. We will have a ton of fun spring training conversations. We always cover, the actual games themselves. But we don't do like full breakdowns like we do in the regular season of the games, kind of just like the noteworthy performances. And then a lot of, playing time debates and who's going to make the roster debates and biggest storylines in spring training. We always do an episode in regards to that. It's going to be a fun next few weeks as we prep for spring training games to come back. Today, though, we talk about PECOTA projections. As I said before the break, Cleveland, just a few months removed from making the ALCS, having one of the highest win totals in the American League, and winning the AL Central, and eliminating your Detroit Tigers in Game 5 of the ALDS, projected at a sub 500 record. Now, this is another technicality. If you are to round, they are also 81 and 81. 80.8 wins to 81.2 losses. So 0.2 of a win removed from an 81 and 81 season. So again, they have Kansas City and Cleveland right at almost exactly 500 baseball teams. I think far too highly of Cleveland, and maybe that is a product of just that stretch, that brutal stretch for about 6-7 years where the Tigers just got absolutely pumped by the Guardians every single time they played them. They were absolutely just destroying. They owned the Tigers for a few years there. So maybe it's just a product of that still lingering in the back of my head. But I know the pitching factory that they used to have has maybe taken a little bit of a step back over the last year and a half than what it was. But I still believe in the pitching that it can produce. This was legitimately one of the best bullpens I have seen in my lifetime. That's not an exaggeration either. They were comfortably the best bullpen in baseball. And I think that that's why you see them projected at around an 81 and 81 record. It is very hard to replicate dominant bullpens from year to year. Relievers are so weird. And if you're a hockey fan, it's kind of like how goalies are sometimes on the ice, where it's like Sergei Bobrovsky in hockey. It's like this guy at his best is one of the best goalies in the sport, but he also can go out there and, while being one of the highest paid goalies in hockey rather, can put up a barely 900 save percentage one year. Like, they're just so volatile, and they swing on the pendulum to extremes all the time. It's very, very difficult. That's what makes Mariano Rivera the greatest reliever ever. Like, It's so hard to be a dominant reliever every single year. And and for a long period of time, you will see relievers that are all stars that are phenomenal. Go look at like all-star seasons, like all-star rosters from years past, and just look at some of the names that make it. It's like, wow, this dude was an all-star. He's had a 5 ERA last year. Like that is so common. So I think a little bit of that in the PECOTA projections for Cleveland is just like, you know what, this is probably a team that's gonna have a good bullpen still. They have the best reliever in baseball, I believe, in Class A, but probably won't be as dominant. Like half their bullpen with sub-2 ERAs. Like, what's the likelihood of that again? And so I think that probably has a little bit to do with it. They traded one of their best relievers. Well, I say one of their best, one of their good, really good, better relievers over the offseason as well. Naylor got off to a really hot start last year and then kind of cooled off. The offense, there's still a lot of question marks around whether there's enough surrounding J-Ram. I get a comeback down to earth a little bit, but I still have them pegged for like a mid to high 80s win total type of team. But I do understand like they won a lot of really close games. And usually, not always, but usually in baseball, if a team wins a lot of close games one year, it's very hard to replicate that in year over year over year. The Detroit Tigers projected 4th in PECOTA and are projected to win 79 and a half games and lose 82 and a half. That puts them, we're right in the middle there, so we can't really round either direction, but somewhere in that 79 to 80 win total, just a game or two under 500. So I think it's interesting that the projection system still accounts for having 4 teams that are all around 500 or better, but it doesn't have any purely over the top kind of this is a team that's going to win 90 plus either. And I find that very interesting. We end with Chicago, obviously 61 and 100 is their projection. Actually, 61 and 101, if we're rounding, is their projection. I expect Chicago to be much better than last year because how could they not be? But 60 wins would still kind of surprise me. I'm not going to lie. So let's talk about your Tigers. Obviously, that's why we're all here. One of the great new features that Prospectus has added over the last year or so is looking at their depth chart player summary. I think this is fascinating. So when it simulates, it accounts for these players playing this percentage of game at each position. Okay. The pitching rotation, we can kind of skip. Like that's kind of self-explanatory. Skubal, Olsen, Flaherty, Job getting in there, Cobb, obviously, Casey Mize still in the mix too. Those 6 account for nearly all starts. You have a couple percent thrown to Sawyer Gibson-Long, Cater Montero, Matt Manning, Brant Herter, et cetera, et cetera. The bullpen also not really a factor in this. If you do care, the reliever that they project to have the most saves is Bo Brisky. 70% of save opportunities. Baseball Prospectus projects Bo Brisky to take. Jason Foley with 20% and Tommy Kahnle with 10%. Tyler Holton, 8% of all relief appearances. Makes sense. Gunther with 9%. Will Vest with 9%. Alex Lang still with 8%. So interesting there that Bo Brisky is the projected starter. Not sure I agree with that, but that'll be one of the things to watch in spring training. Let's talk about the hitters, because that is obviously where most of this storyline and most of this feature is going to be applicable. We will do that right after this. All right, everybody, welcome back to your third and final segment, Locked On Tigers. Appreciate y'all for tuning in, as always. So, talking about the projected divvying of playing time throughout the Tigers roster here, according to PECOTA projections. So, at catcher, we have a 60-40 split between Jake Rogers and Dylan Dingler, with Jake Rogers also getting a projected 35 plate appearances at DH, which is 5% of all DH at bats in the 2025 season. I think that's probably fairly accurate, the 60-40 split. And obviously this is assuming health for everybody. This does not, they're not going to project or predict injuries. So you got to take that into account. I think there's a pretty high likelihood that some third-party catcher we're not talking about is, at least plays one game for the Tigers, just because what are the odds Dingler and Rogers both spend the whole season fully healthy? But I think it's probably accurate that they're going to be close to a 60-40 split. The interesting thing with me with this catching tandem, if it is the long-term tandem, which there's no guarantee it is, but let's just pretend it is, they're both righties, and so it's not a perfect platoon of like, oh, you just throw this guy against righties and this guy against lefties. It's there's going to be a little bit more nuance to that, which AJ Hinch loves. Like he loves trying to, what matchup is truly going to be the best that day. Rogers will obviously get the immediate bump of just getting all of Scooble's starts, which certainly will add to his playing time, just kind of floor as well. But I think I would probably lean a little bit closer to maybe 65-35 even. But that also has a lot to do with the offensive ability of both of these guys. And that is kind of a Captain Obvious statement. But like if Jake Rogers hit like he did in 2023, then he will probably push 70%, maybe even 75% playing time. And you're talking about Dylan Dingler maybe catching one game a series and Rogers catching the rest of the season. But if Rogers hit like he did last year and Dylan Dingler, because Dylan Dingler's not that bad of a hitter. He's not. This is just what he does at every single level he plays at. He starts off really slow, gets used to the timing, and then kind of explodes from there and it gets significantly better. So if he can shake off the rust and really kind of not shake off the rust, he's never played in the majors before. If he can get acclimated to the major leagues, is much better way of wording that. Then he can absolutely be a solid, 715 to 730 OPS hitter. And if that's the case, then you might even be talking about pushing a 50-50 split. So I think there's a little bit of volatility there. I feel like I've used that word a lot in this episode. But I think on a base level, 60-40 is probably close to what we will see. First base. One of the more interesting storylines heading into spring training. Colt Keith projected to get 560 plate appearances at first base. That is 80% of the first base share and 5%, 35 plate appearances, similar to Jake Rogers, at the DH position for Colt Keith. Now, the immediate question is who's filling in the rest of that first base gap? We'll answer that in a second. DH is fascinating to me because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different players that all are getting projected playing time at DH. This is exactly what this front office and this coaching staff wanted when Miguel Cabrera retired. Exactly what they wanted. They didn't want somebody who's just going to come in and be the only DH. And not that there's anything inherently wrong with that. There's plenty of great teams in the history of baseball. There's plenty of great teams right now. Notably, the best team in baseball right now has a DH that only plays DH every single day. Now, he's one of the best players we've ever seen and also pitches. So I'm not sure that really counts. But like, the Tigers really wanted when Miguel Cabrera retired to have lineup flexibility to give to AJ Hinch. And to be able to give him the ability to play matchups for DH and not just have, this is our designated hitter all year. That's why the Tigers haven't expressed interest in JD Martinez over the last couple of years, even though the fan base talks about it every single season, right? They don't want someone to only play DH. And so that's why you see whatever number I said, 5, 6, 7 different players all projected with playing time at DH this season. And I think that we saw that last season too. But I think that that's exactly what this coaching staff wants. And so I think some people might look at that and say, oh, wow, like we don't have a DH. No, we do. It's just, to quote Moneyball, you're recreating a DH in the aggregate, right? Like that joking aside, like that really is what they're trying to do. They're trying to get the most production out of that position without having it all be just one player. First base, 80% Colt Keith, 15% Spencer Torkelson. Spencer Torkelson also projected with 15% DH. So that is, I was going to say that's 30% total, but like this is position by position, so that's not really how that works. But he's projected to have 210 plate appearances. That is not a lot. That is a third of a season-ish, give or take, and depending on the year. So That is obviously not being projected as an everyday starter, but still projected to have over 100 plate appearances at first base and at DH, which I find interesting. Colt Keith, barring a just horrible outing and performance at first base in spring training, is absolutely going to be the de facto starter at that position. He's a lefty. He's not a platoon guy. He actually hit better against lefties than righties for a large majority of the season last year. They really want him to work out there for the 2025 season at least. And that is because he's moving off of second base. Obviously, Gleyber Torres recently brought in this offseason. Excited for him to make his Tigers debut. He has 595 projected plate appearances, and all 595 are at second base. He is projected to get 85% of the reps at the position of second base. Obviously, a couple of those go to, Zach McKinstry and Andy Ibanez to kind of fill in the rest of the gaps. But there's really not too much of a conversation here. Gleyber Torres, you brought him in to play second base and only second base. He's talked about that before pretty publicly when he was with the Yankees. We can almost with certainty, assuming health, plug Gleyber Torres in as this team's starting second baseman in both platoons, any situation for the entire year. Jace Young, currently the clubhouse leader for playing time at third base. We'll talk about Matt Vierling here in a second because I think his breakdown is one of the more fascinating on the entire team. But Jace Young projected at 60% of the playing time at third base, and then no other projections. They don't have him playing second base, which we already talked about. They don't have him getting reps at DH. You got 5 or 6 other guys that can handle that. I think that's kind of fascinating that he is the most projected playing time at third, but he's still only playing in 60% of the season. He's going to be pushing, around 100 games and still not play more, actually, over a third of the season this year, according to PECOTA. So I find that interesting. Obviously, third base is a big topic of conversation. We're still waiting on a Bregman decision, et cetera, et cetera. But that is, him being projected to be the majority third baseman over Vierling, I find pretty fascinating. Zach McKinstry, not too much to talk about here. He's projected to play 5 different positions, all at 15 or fewer percentage. Third base 15%, left field 10%, first base 5%, second base 5%, shortstop 5%. Sounds about right. Yeah, if Zach McKinstry makes it through the whole season on the roster, that is what we can expect from him. I completely agree. Andy Ibanez, similar conversation, 10% at third base. So you have between Zach McKinstry and Andy Ibanez, PECOTA projects that those two players are going to combine for a quarter of the starts or the plate appearances, I should say, at third base. Find that kind of interesting. 5% at second base, 5% at DH. We know that Andy is going to be out of the lineup against righties and in the lineup and in a prominent position against lefties. Shortstop. And everyone's rolling their eyes. This might bring a smile to your face on this Monday. You're driving to work. You're tired. You're getting ready for the day. You stayed up late for the Super Bowl. Guess what? Trey Sweeney projected to have more plate appearances at shortstop than Javier Baez. Look at that. Trey Sweeney, 55% of the share projected to go to him at the shortstop position. Javi Baez, this one I find really interesting, 40%. And obviously, like we said, Zach McKinstry picking up the rest of the slack there. 40% at shortstop. So you're kind of, which we projected, right? Kind of a true platoon at short. Righties are going to face Trey Sweeney. Lefties are going to face Baez. There's more righties than lefties. There you go. 5% projected at second base for Javi Baez. I would be very, very interested in seeing if that becomes true. Only 35 plate appearances. You're only talking about, a handful of games, 5, 6, 7 games there. But it would be interesting if they moved him off of shortstop at any point and how that would go over with everybody else. We get to the outfield. Riley Green, not too much to say. 80% left field, 5% center field, 5% right field. Probably a little bit more in right, I would project, but he was so good. Got snubbed of Gold Glove nomination in left field. And he's going to be the primary left fielder. Justin Henry Malloy, 5% left field, 5% DH. I think that's probably pretty accurate, assuming there's health for everybody. Malloy's at-bats are probably going to have to be due to injuries in the outfield. I think out of camp, there's a very, very slim chance that he's making the team out of spring training this year, but he will get at bats this calendar year, absolutely. And I think that that's probably a fair assumption. Parker Meadows, 80% projected at center field. I hope it's higher. Like genuinely, that's like the one that I hope is like 90 to 100 even. I hope Parker Meadows takes every single at bat at center field, and is our center fielder for every second of the upcoming season. And that's not because I don't like other players or anything like that, and that no one else can play it necessarily. But he is comfortably the best center fielder on the team, and down the stretch, hit lefties significantly better. So, in a perfect world, he's your leadoff hitter. Well, in a perfect world, he's your leadoff hitter in 162 games. But I think in a realistically perfect world, he is your leadoff hitter against righties and your 9 hitter against lefties, and is playing in every situation all season long because he is such a dynamic player. You want him. You don't want to take him out of the game. You want him in the ball game in as many situations as possible. One of the more interesting ones on this whole list as we come to a close here, Wenceel Perez, projected to get 60% of the plate appearances among right fielders for the Detroit Tigers. I find that fascinating. I think between Kerry Carpenter and Matt Vierling, I assumed that they would get a majority, but no, it is in fact Wenceel Perez. And that is somebody that I kind of got heat for, I feel like a few weeks ago maybe, for not including him in the depth chart, the FanGraphs depth chart projection we did a couple of weeks ago. And I rightfully so. I didn't really bring him up. I think that conversation surrounding Wenceel Perez and his status on the roster and making the team in 2025 is also going to be one of the hottest storylines in spring training. I am very excited for him to try to force the issue and kind of force his way on this roster. But it's obviously very far from a guarantee too. But PECOTA has him being the de facto starting right fielder. Matt Vierling, 30% right field, 15% of reps at third base, and 15% of reps in center field. All of that makes sense to me. Again, I kind of assumed that right field would be a little bit of a higher number. But if you're talking about a third of the time he's going to be our right fielder, again, 15% and 15% in center field and third base. I think that's probably close to what you're going to see. He's going to get some reps in center when a really good lefty is on the mound late in the game and Parker Meadows is up. He'll get some reps at third, obviously. Now, third base is the biggest question mark, because if they don't sign another third baseman, then I think that number kind of skyrockets for Matt Vierling, where if they do sign Bregman, then that number goes down even more at third and goes up, obviously, in right field. So kind of an interesting conversation there. And then we end with Kerry Carpenter, who's projected to have one of the highest plate appearance totals on the team. Understandably so. This team's best hitter a year ago, 65% of the opportunities at DH, 5% left field, 5% right field. I think those numbers are too low. That's like one of the ones that I hardcore disagree with. I think we're kind of in the ballpark with the rest of them, as I highlighted there. I would be shocked if only 10% of his opportunities came in the field and the rest came at DH. Should I say 60%? 65% at DH, it says. So yeah, I think he's going to get a lot more opportunities in the outfield, and I think that's fine. He was a better defender last season than I honestly ever thought he was going to be. He's got a pretty good arm out there as well. I think he's taken a lot of strides and improved a lot in his outfield defense over the last year and a half. So I anticipate him to not just be the we're going to place you at DH every single game. As I mentioned earlier, not to rehash that conversation. So I anticipate him to get some more opportunities in corner outfield than this projects. That's it, though. All in all, my final thoughts just on the standings. I don't think the Tigers are going to be the fourth best team in the AL Central. I think that's too low. But I could see third, and I could see them winning. Like I could see anywhere in that range, and I could see them being an 80-win team and falling just under 500, and kind of maybe being in it majority of the season, being within striking distance, but never getting over the edge and missing out on the postseason. I could also see them putting everything together, maybe signing a big name free agent still here and being one of the better teams in the American League Central. So I'll give you a lot more as we get closer to the regular season of like a real season projection. We have a whole episode where we project the upcoming season right before opening day. So we'll go way more in depth on that one for like my personal thoughts. But as far as these go, I know people are going to be upset that they're projected to finish under 500 and be fourth place, and the fan base is going to be mad. I'm not going to stand in the way of that, but I actually don't think that this is like like extremely disrespectful. Like if the Tigers finish with 84 wins, that's 4 wins better than what they're projecting. That's not actually too far off in terms of formulas and whatnot go. So thanks for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. Shouts to every dayers that do tune in every day. We will, of course, be back tomorrow as we're back to 5 episodes a week. A little bit of a longer episode today. I apologize for that. We'll be back to, regularly scheduled programming tomorrow. First Tuesday episode in a while. Peace and love. Going to therapy's dope. I'll catch y'all then, baby. Go Tigers.